right, we're talking about breastfeeding, we're talking about like bonding,
Mhm.
a lot of these things, like especially in the first 2 to 6 months of life at least,
Mhm.
like women bear the majority of that labor.
Sure. But I say, so what?
So to say who cares, a lot of us care.
Mhm.
And I think that it takes a lot of strength to care. And I think that it actually, to say, oh, I don't care, stop
Mhm.
complaining, that's the easy way out. I don't
Mhm.
want to take the easy way out.
Mhm.
I think that being passionate
You
about empathy is really like the strength. It takes strength to be sensitive, it takes strength to be vulnerable and transparent. I think that it's really easy, and it's the easy way out to just be callous and to say we can't make change and I don't care about your feelings.
Okay, well, again, you can say that, but it doesn't change the reality of the world. And the thing is, if you want to be in a man's world, then be in it. And what women try to do is they go into a man's world and tell them how it should be different.
Yeah, because as you've
Even
recognized,
though even though they've done none of
it
the
seems
work,
like are
even
you
though they've
interviewing
done the
me, or are
work,
we
even though they've done none of the work of building the society. But go ahead.
our society has been stagnated and has been held back because women have been held back. Imagine the prosperity and imagine the opportunity that the world would have if women weren't held back and women weren't stagnated. And you continuously complain
Mhm.
about these things that men have to endure and then simultaneously call it a men's world that women should be grateful to be a part of, but we should also be sensitive towards the things that they've built that are detrimental to themselves.
Mhm. So, what do you think men did historically? Like, what do you think their jobs were? Like 1800s, what were your choices as a man to do as a job? Because you always talk about how women were held back historically. So I'm asking, like, what was life like back then?
Well, women had to
1800s.
stay home and men had to do all of the jobs
Okay,
because they didn't allow women to help them.
what were their jobs that they did? What were the most common methods of employment back then?
I mean, what do you mean? I mean,
Like,
it's going to be construction, it's going to be medicine, it's going to be food production, it's going to be factories, it's going like the same thing that runs all of societies.
so they had three choices: coal miner, farmer, factory worker.
Nothing else happened in society in the
I'm not saying
1800s.
nothing else. That was the majority of how people were employed.
Mhm.
So you guys have this like rewritten history where you guys think that men just had these glamorous, fun jobs, but
No.
men did the difficult job. Men know that they didn't enjoy their jobs. Like, do you think any guy is going to a coal mine and saying, "Wow, this is my passion"?
And again, who set that system up?
It's not about who set it up. It's how would the system run without it. They need coal. At the time, they needed coal. Like the same way now, somebody has to build the buildings. Somebody has to get the food. Otherwise, society does not run.
Correct. And we're better off when women participate and when women are able to help men. Like we talk about all of these like detrimental aspects of these harmful
Mhm,
industries, and arguably if we cared about how people felt, we were
mhm,
compassionate towards their experience, we would put more time and energy to improving these harmful industries.
mhm,
And if women had been allowed to enter into these industries earlier, you could argue that they would be safer industries because we have empathy and we want to value progression and we want to recognize problems and address them. We don't just see a problem and say, hey, that's a problem, and then sit on it. Like, no, you recognize a problem, you recognize what causes it, and you
mhm.
fix it.
Okay, so I told you about the crab fishing today. What are you gonna do now?
As I said, that's not my job. There are people
Okay,
who
so
are
you're
on,
doing the same
excuse me,
thing.
if I
Okay,
could
okay.
please speak.
Go ahead.
As I've said before, there are people on safety committees. There are
Mhm,
people on workers' unions. There are people whose jobs are dedicated to worker safety.
mhm.
So if you're very passionate about that, you should probably invite one of them to sit down in the studio and ask them that question
Okay, so nothing? You're not gonna
because
do
that's
anything
not
about
my
it? Okay.
job.
I'm just clarifying you're doing the same thing.
No, because I'm more
Okay.
than happy to recognize that it's a problem that should be addressed by somebody whose specialty it is to address that problem.
Okay. So the next topic I'm wanting to get into, and we can skip this one if you want, but I wanted to talk about trans and women's sports or no? You want to talk
Mm,
about, you okay with that?
I mean, we can talk about it briefly. That's
Okay, yeah,
fine.
cool. Okay. I don't want to, so, okay. So how do you feel about trans women playing in female sports?
I personally have no problem with it. I think that there are advantages and disadvantages to be found in the spectrum of biology, regardless of like gender and otherwise.
Mm,
I see the concerns about the advantages that certain athletes will have over another. But again, I think that that is a problem that we recognize and we need to figure out how to address it to make it equitable for everybody to be able to participate appropriately. It is not my specialty. I don't have any specific solutions, but I think solutions do exist that we can utilize to make it like advantageous for everybody. I
mhm,
also think that this is an issue that is largely overblown. And if we want to talk about the issues in women's sports, trans athletes are not the major problem. There are so many bigger problems that should be addressed and should get a lot more airtime.
mhm,
But I think that this is a strategy that is utilized to distract attention away from real problems and to demonize a group, because this is the same thing we see on the political spectrum,
mhm,
right? Where we want to pick a group and demonize them and make everyone believe that this is the root of our problems when they are not.
mhm.
They are just people who want to participate in athletics and sports like everyone else. And I think that it's a really easy way for the sports committees and for media to direct attention to a small group of people and demonize them while ignoring the plethora of issues that female athletes have to endure otherwise.
So I actually agree with you on one part. I do think they overblow the issue. I've played volleyball for like 16 years. I told you before the podcast I had one experience, maybe. Um, However, I'm a little bit confused by your answer because it was. Could you just say it in a more simple way? Are you for it? You're okay with it, or you're not?
So
Like,
I
okay, if
have
they said tomorrow, they said, I'm sorry, I do this sometimes, but they said tomorrow, hey, you get the final decision. Are they allowed or are they not allowed?
So I would reject that option because it's a nuanced discussion. I think that if you want to turn something nuanced into black and white, you're going to run into problems and
Yeah.
you're going to automatically come to the wrong conclusion.
Well, but the way these leagues are run, they have a rule book. So when I was playing in England, there was a rule book every season.
Hmm.
And so somebody has to write the rules.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the rule book, it has to be black and white.
It
And
really doesn't, though, because you could take into account hormone levels, you could take into account like muscle mass. Like there are plenty of things that you could do to try to make things more fair and equal. And so I don't think it's necessarily what are your genitals? That's the group you get assigned to. Like I think it's a way more complex and nuanced issue.
do you think that women have a right to feel uncomfortable in locker rooms when men are in them? Sorry, I know you're gonna say it's like whatever you call them, but the guys dressed like whatever. The
People,
men
so
pretending
I,
to be women.
so I
Sorry, I
think
know you're gonna call it something else,
you're
but
trying to talk about people who are assigned male at birth, but who identify as women through like societal
yeah,
norms. Like that is what a trans woman is like by definition.
that's too
Um,
long for me.
I know. It seems like you don't really like complicated thoughts. So it seems to be like the
That was
over.
rude.
I mean, I'm just making an observation because
Okay.
anytime that I try to implement nuance into a discussion, you
Well,
say like
because
that's just overthinking it. That's just too complex. So it
not
just
not
seems like
necessarily. The reason I say that is because I think you do that to evade questions where you can't give a definitive answer.
no,
And
because
so
you
I just
want.
like to be direct and get like, what do you believe out of this? And
Mhm.
sometimes I think you talk in circles.
Because you can't keep up with what I'm saying. So
No,
I
I
speak.
can keep up,
Yeah,
but
and
I
so
think you need to just give
because
a direct answer. Go ahead.
you're asking me nuanced questions that require a nuanced answer,
Mhm.
but you can't ask a nuanced question and desire a black and white answer. That's just like not how the world
But
works,
that's
as
a
you
really
like to
simple
say.
question. What would the rule book say?
And I answered that. I said that we should be able to take into account different biochemical markers in order to make something more equitable.
Okay, so a trans person comes in and they say, I want to play in the women's league. How are you going to deal with the situation?
What I just said. Take into account biochemical markers to make the competition more equitable.
Okay, so how would you measure it? What
That's
is
not
the
my job.
process?
So there's
Okay,
so many things as I
okay.
mentioned previously, there's hormone levels, there's muscle mass, there's all these different things that you can measure. If
Mhm.
we're really going to say that trans people in sports are this huge issue that we need to dedicate so much time to, then if we're going to dedicate this much time to talking about them, then we
Mhm.
should dedicate
Well,
equally the
it
amount of
wouldn't be
time
that
we should dedicate
it
equally
wouldn't be
the
that long of a conversation if you just got to the answer. Are they allowed or are they not allowed?
because it's not a simple
If they're
answer.
allowed, what exceptions are we making?
It's not a simple answer. You want a simple answer to a complex problem, and that's not how the world works.
It is how that works because I've played in sports and the rules are generally pretty simple.
Just because you desire a simple answer does not mean that the answer is simple.
Okay, well, that one is pretty simple. They either allow them or they don't if you look at the rule books.
But that's not equitable or fair, which I believe in an equitable and fair society, which you've made it very clear that you don't, which is probably why we disagree.
I do want society to be fair, but if women, the thing is, women want all the privileges without doing the work. So why aren't you pushing for women to do 50% of the hard jobs in society, the infrastructure jobs?
I want them to. They can if they want to.
If they want to, but they
Mhm.
won't. And that's the catch.
I mean, do men want to be in those jobs? Like, they don't have to if they don't want to.
No, but many do it because they have to.
Are
And
they
because
drafted into
they
the
know
crab fishing industry? Or do they choose to go into the crab fishing industry?
a lot of men do jobs because they know that no one else is going to do them.
And that sounds like a choice that they are making for themselves.
Okay, so going back to equality, do you think that women should be enlisted in the draft?
I don't think that the draft should exist. I think nobody should be drafted.
Okay, but since it is, men are enlisted in selective service and they're fined $300,000 if they don't sign up for this. Do you think that women should have to too in the name of equality?
I think if we're talking about equality, if women don't have to sign up for the draft, then men shouldn't either.
Okay, then we agree. But since they do have to, do you think they should too?
I think that we should abolish the draft. So you want
Okay.
me to go in your direction and I'm taking it in my direction. You
Mhm.
want everyone to be subjugated and controlled, and I want everyone to be free.
I don't have an opinion one way or the other. My
Sounds
point,
like you do.
my point is that it should be fair.
Yeah.
So if the men have to do it, then the women have to do it too.
Or if the women don't
So-
have to do it, then the men shouldn't have to do it.
Right. But right now the men have to do it.
And right now the women don't.
Correct.
So
And
it
that's
could
why
go
that's
either
why
way.
that's why it goes back to feminists never fight for equality when it comes to men's issues. I've never heard women say women sign up for selective service like the men. They just say, "Oh, that's a hard thing. We don't want to have to do it."
So you haven't spoken to like many academic feminists, because many academic feminists who want full societal equality
Mhm.
do advocate for men's issues. And we recognize the way that certain societal norms, which by the way are designed and built and created by men, are detrimental to men. And
Mhm.
we advocate because a lot of feminist ideology is beneficial to men. And so we are advocating for men. And so you say men have to sign up for the draft, so women should have to, where I go the opposite. You seem,
Well, it's
can I
selective
finish my
service.
thought
It's
though?
selective
Because
service, but
you
yeah.
seem to be very pro control, where I'm pro freedom. I want everyone to have freedom over their body. I want everyone to have freedom over their choices, where you seem to go in the opposite direction and say if one group is subjugated, we should
Mhm.
subjugate everyone.
It's
And I
not
don't
what-
agree.
That's not what I said. But okay, let's go into family court. Do you think that custody should be 50-50 off the bat?
Like physical, or there's different kinds of custody.
Child custody.
Like who they live with or who makes legal decisions for them.
Yeah, 50-50 off the bat.
So those are two different things. But I think that it is going to be a nuanced discussion and based on family dynamics.
Okay. But in general, if there's no abuse or anything crazy like that, 50-50 off the bat as a starting point.
I think that every case should be taken into account from its individual and nuanced perspective. I think that, sure, abuse should absolutely be taken into account, but also should finances, also should desire for childcare, also should geographical location, like all of these different things.
But I'm asking for a starting point. 50-50 custody off the bat.
I think that each partner should be looked at equitably and there should be no discrimination towards either from the get-go.
From the get,
Mhm.
okay, so we would agree off the bat, starting, it's 50-50. I understand if there's abuse, if there's one parent wants to work more, totally fine, they can work that out. But I'm saying to start off the bat, 50-50 custody, no child support, no alimony.
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, no child support, no alimony.
That's not what I said
No,
either.
I'm asking you, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so as I previously said, I think that each case should be analyzed and should be, when it comes to finances, when it comes to abuse, when it comes to all of these things, like that's going to be so unique to each individual circumstance. So to say no alimony or full child support or 50-50, like these are people, and
Mhm.
people are complex. And so you seem to want simple answers for complex issues.
No, I want a starting point. I
Hmm.
understand that it's complicated in family dynamics. There's abusive women, there's abusive men.
Hmm.
That would change a family dynamic, you would agree,
Yeah.
right? There are differences in schedules for work.
Hmm.
Totally can be worked out, but I'm saying off the bat 50-50 custody, no child support, no alimony.
Yeah, and I disagree.
Yeah. And that's my point. Whenever I talk about an issue that would help men or be more fair to men and that benefits women, you don't give me a straight answer.
Who
And you
designed the
say
legal
it's
system?
complicated.
Who designed the legal system?
Who designed it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
men.
I mean, it depends because some of the laws are like Title 4D came in the past um 50 years, I want to say. And by then, like women have the majority of voting power. So most of the laws in recent years are catered to women.
So actually, most of these laws are not determined by a vote. Most of these laws are determined by politicians. And right now, more men, historically and present day, hold positions of power. And so these policies that you're talking about are not policies that the population is voted
Mm.
on at large. These are policies that have been designed primarily by men in power. So if you want to talk about how the system is detrimental to men, you
Mm.
also need to recognize that men are detrimental to men.
Right, but who are they representing? The politicians. Who votes more?
Who votes more?
Yeah, who turns up to vote more? Who is the majority of the population?
Women.
Okay, so they represent women's interests.
Not
And
necessarily,
then,
no.
and you can see that what percent of the time do men get custody in family court?
So it actually now the majority of child custody cases are joint custody.
That's not true.
It is. It's
Men
about
only men only
50.3%.
men only get custody 10% of the time.
So we're looking at different statistics.
Most alimony payments are men to women. Most child support payments are men to women.
And that's because historical
and most
precedent. Yeah. You have to take into like historical context of like and also men earn more than women. Like there's so much nuance to this. But
mm,
from Cornell, I was reading a study by Cornell University that
mm.
looked at divorces and custody and all these things. And the majority, I think it was 50.3% of child custody cases end up as being joint custody.
The majority of child support and alimony payments are men to women.
Yeah, because men earn more.
That is the biggest wealth transfer in the United States. If women want to be independent, I actually have no problem. Like as I said before, I think it's very impressive you became a doctor. I just think that women that want to take that path should pay for it.
So do you think that the money is for her or for the children?
I think that women do not always spend it on the kids.
Because it takes more to
You
actually
know,
like run a household.
there are men in poverty over these laws.
Yeah, and a lot of child support isn't paid either. And you can also opt out of child support by relinquishing your parental rights in a lot of states. So if you don't want any rights as a parent, then you can relinquish those rights and then you won't be held accountable for child support. But if you still want to be in that child's life and you want to be involved, then you will have to pay child support. So,
No, they take it directly out of your bank account. You can lose your fishing license.
oh no. Poor
You
man.
can it is. It's really there's men that kill
Ugh,
themselves over this. I know you think it's
ugh.
funny, but like I've interviewed men that were a mile from their kids and haven't seen them in years. And they wanted nothing. I know you think it's like funny, but it's really not.
No, I don't think that it's funny.
Like
I think
like
that you bringing up men losing their fishing licenses while talking about women bearing the majority of like childcare
well
duties is like
the
that like comparison is humorous to me. Not men unaliving themselves,
well
not men
no
losing money, but just like that
that's the
comparison
point.
is
That's I
humorous.
mean that's like one of many things that they lose. They lose their fishing license. Like that's
Oh
one.
no.
But my point is that it's unconstitutional. Like I know you think it's funny, but it's really not.
I
I mean,
mean it
men
is.
are 9 times more likely to commit suicide after a divorce. This literally
Mhm.
kills men.
Yeah, exactly, because men actually benefit from marriage more than women do. And when you look at the statistics of like post-divorce mental health outcomes,
Mm.
men have worse mental health outcomes than women. Women are typically happier after divorce. And so if you want to argue that that marriage disproportionately benefits women, like that's not true.
I'd be pretty unhappy too if I was on child support or alimony and I had a hard time seeing my kids.
And you had to support your children. What a hard life.
Well, you understand that it's not taxed. So the problem is they take over 50% of the man's income.
But I also think that
That's the
the way that you look at these issues and the way that you look at these divorces is very nefarious towards women. And so I just think that it's very interesting to see the way that you speak about women and the way that you think about women and the way that you think that we make these decisions as if we're just flippantly getting a divorce and like taking advantage of men, as if like it's not more nuanced than that, because you don't seem to appreciate the nuance of the human
I
experience
think
and the complexity of relationships.
I think there are valid reasons for divorce. If women want to divorce, that's totally fine. They can do that. I think that they should pay for their decisions. Again, this goes back to I say if you want the freedom to do something, you should take the responsibility that comes with it. You want them to
Mhm.
have the freedom to do something, but not have the responsibility that comes with it. So you say you can have the freedom to divorce. Totally, we agree, right? We can have the freedom to be a single mother, to go into medicine or whatever career you want, but I think you should have the responsibility to pay for it. And I don't think that, do you think that's unreasonable?
Well, I would just flip it around, right?
Mm.
I would say that if men want the freedom to be a part of their child's life, then they should accept the responsibility that that entails, which includes financial responsibility.
But women have the right to work now
Yeah, but men still out earn women.
because they do harder jobs.
Not necessarily, no. Because,
You don't think doing an infrastructure job is more difficult than the number one employers of women, which is admin, assistants, education.
so
Education, you get out at like 3 o'clock, 2:30. I mean, there's men dying, getting you the chair you're sitting on. There's men
okay.
dying to protect you, literally.
So statistically, when they look at the gender wage gap, they've shown that women in the exact same positions with the exact same qualifications make less than men. So it's not this like strange overarching pattern that you like to point out that
Mhm,
men are in these dangerous jobs and they run
mhm,
society. Like that's just not true when it comes to the gender wage gap. They've controlled for these variables when they study this, and there's still a very significant gender wage gap, even when you control for different industries, different degrees, different
mhm,
qualifications, different hours, women working all of the same things as men,
mhm.
hours, degrees, industries, education, whatever, still make less than men. So
Me
if you want to pull it back towards childcare or child support, then you have to recognize that like on a societal scale, like
mhm,
the wage gap is there, and so that's also going to contribute to the gap in child support and financial
mhm. Well,
responsibility.
women don't do as good of a job. They don't produce as much in the workforce. That's why
That's
they get
actually
paid less.
incorrect. They've
They
done they've done
they
an
make 80% of the world's stuff. Women.
okay.
Men have invented 90% of things. Men.
Where did you get that statistic?
Google it.
Google it. Right, I will.
Top of I mean,
So, and I would
it's
argue that especially
A World Without
historically,
Men too. It's in that book.
okay.
It's an economist. He breaks down.
I would argue that also historically, women have been erased from their accomplishments. A lot of people don't know that Albert Einstein had a wife who actually helped him and got the same degrees that he
Hmm.
did. She went to the same schools that he did, same classes, but they didn't award her a degree because she was a woman. And I'm not done. And she helped him develop the monumental calculations that we still utilize today. And he's been quoted saying that he would be nowhere near as
Hmm.
successful and would have never found the and like developed the equations that he did without her. So that's just one anecdotal part. But when you look at the actual productivity and efficiency of women, if you are a female surgeon, you are going to have better surgical outcomes. This has been studied numerous times,
Hmm.
and statistically, female surgeons have better outcomes than male surgeons. They've also analyzed the top 500 companies, like Fortune 500, I think,
Yeah, but
and the
they're
ones,
only 20% of surgeons.
yeah. And so,
They're,
isn't that amazing that only 20% of women have better outcomes than 80% of
and they
men?
would be doing the majority of medical breakthroughs. They're not. They're not the majority.
But they are the surgeries that they are doing and the work that they are doing is higher quality than the work that
According
men
to
are
who?
doing.
According to what? Some study?
Multiple
If they
studies.
could dominate the field, they would go do it.
We are.
Where's the
There's
female
actually,
billionaires? All the female billionaires are rich off of men's money.
yeah, so it's actually 80% of billionaires inherited their family's money, but that's
From
beyond the
a
point.
man or a woman?
From men because
Exactly,
because
because men are
historical
more
precedent,
men are
Pearl.
more productive.
Historical precedent,
Okay,
Pearl.
but there's we've had 50 years. Like, where is the female Elon Musk? Where is
So they've actually analyzed the top 500
Sorry, go ahead.
companies, and female CEOs, companies that are run by female CEOs outperform companies that are run by male CEOs. So as I've said before, if women were not historically stagnated and kept behind and banned from partaking in education in all of these industries, I would argue that our society would be better off. We would be safer, we'd be happier, we'd be more efficient, just based on the last 50 years where we
Mm.
have been able to partake at a higher level. And all of the statistics show that we are more successful than men when we compete with them. And we are still making up for the historical precedent in the past. And we do all of that while enduring discrimination, while enduring doubt, while enduring things like pregnancy and childbearing without maternal or maternity leave that's guaranteed. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have mandatory maternity leave. Like, our country is so broken on all of these levels, and we have so many other things that we could be talking about to improve society. But instead, we're talking about like how men die on crab boats and they have to pay child support when, like, arguably that is not the biggest issue that we have in our country.
So you think that we talk too much about men dying at work?
No, that's not what I said. I
That's what
think
you
that's
just that's
no,
what you just said.
no, I think that's an
Okay.
oversimplification of my statement.
Okay. What do you think would be better issues to focus on?
I think that we need to focus on the things that are actually impacting Americans, like access to health care. Like I said, mandatory maternity leave and paternity leave. I would love if men got the opportunity to spend more time with their children and bond with them. I think that we need to address the housing crisis, because now in the US, dual income educated households cannot afford to buy a home on average in US cities. Like, we have, from healthcare to housing to childcare, we have so many issues that are worth talking about.